On a clear night in 1994, a state-of-the-art commercial jet dropped from the sky. Investigators expected to find frozen engines or a catastrophic mechanical failure. Instead, they found a perfectly functioning aircraft brought down by a sequence of invisible human decisions. The flight originated at Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport on March 23rd. It was the peak of a bitter, freezing Russian winter, and 75 passengers were settling in for a long, overnight route to Hong Kong. Their aircraft was a modern Airbus A310, newly integrated into the Aeroflot fleet. It was a marvel of modern engineering, equipped with highly reliable automated flight systems designed to manage the heavy lifting of long-haul travel. Up front, a professional crew managed hundreds of complex systems. Flying a jet like this required a deep understanding of computer logic, as much as traditional stick and rudder skills. Once the flight crossed into the dark airspace over western Siberia, the environment outside the windows shifted to absolute isolation. Below them was an empty, frozen taiga, with no city lights and zero visual landmarks. When you place a highly automated machine in total darkness, pilots become entirely dependent on their instruments. If those instruments display something unexpected, the crew has to fight their own physical senses to believe them. Leading the crew was Captain Yaroslav Kudrinsky. It was a smooth, routine flight, and the atmosphere on the flight deck was relaxed and cheerful. The captain had brought his two children, 12-year-old Yana and 15-year-old Eldar, along for the trip. Halfway through the night, he invited them up to the flight deck so they could see the controls up close. With the co-pilot briefly stepping away, Captain Kudrinsky let Eldar sit in the left seat. The boy reached out and gripped the yoke. Following his father's instructions to imagine he was flying the jet, Eldar applied a steady, physical pressure to the steering column, simulating a bank to the right. It seemed like a harmless interaction, but that continuous sideways pressure triggered a hidden protocol in the flight computer's logic, an action that quietly dismantled the plane's primary safety net. The A310's autopilot was designed to allow a human to manually override the flight path at any time. To do this, the pilot simply applies sustained physical force to the controls against the computer's resistance. Eldar's steady input reached the exact threshold to override the system, disconnecting the aileron channel while altitude and throttle remained fully engaged. This triggered no loud alarm. The only warning was a single indicator light on a dense panel, completely missed by the adults. With the computer no longer holding the wings steady, the plane responded to the physical position of the yoke. The aircraft slowly began to roll to the right. Because the engines were still maintaining speed and the altitude was holding steady, the crew felt no immediate change in the flight dynamics. They assumed the autopilot was fully in charge, even as the plane slipped into a spiral. If this had happened during the day, the pilots would have immediately seen the horizon tilting in the windshield. But outside, the Siberian night offered zero visual reference points. They also fell victim to a physiological effect known as the lean. When an aircraft enters a very slow, continuous roll, fluid in the human inner ear settles. Without visual cues, the brain is tricked into believing the body is sitting perfectly upright. The bank angle worsened until the wings lost their lifting capability. The nose of the heavy aircraft dropped sharply, and the artificial horizon instrument on the dashboard seemingly spun wildly out of proportion as the plane entered a severe dive. Alarms finally began to sound. The sudden, violent G-forces pinned the crew to their seats. They stared at instruments telling them they were in a nearly vertical plunge, while their disoriented brains struggled to process how they got there. By the time Captain Kudrinsky and his co-pilot understood what the instruments were telling them, the aircraft was trapped in a corkscrew dive, accelerating toward the ground and experiencing stress loads far beyond its structural limits. Plunging from 32,000 feet, the pilots fought gravity and immense physical strain to regain control. They wrestled with the yoke, forcing the nose up, the wings flexing under the extreme pressure as they attempted to break out of the descent. Astonishingly, they succeeded. They managed to level the wings at around 3,000 feet, but they were carrying too much speed, and they had run out of sky. Flight 593 crashed into a forested hillside near Mezhdorechensk at over 300 miles per hour. The impact destroyed the aircraft completely, leaving no survivors. The mechanical systems had not failed. The plane remained highly responsive right up to the final second. This was a tragedy of interface, a perfectly functioning machine interpreting a human action exactly as it was programmed to do. Investigators recovered the cockpit voice and data recorders from the frozen wreckage. When they played back the audio, they were stunned to hear a child's voice asking questions, followed by the terrifying realization of the flight crew. The findings forced immediate regulatory updates across the global aviation industry. Cockpit access was strictly limited, and manufacturers redesigned autopilot systems to include loud, unavoidable auditory warnings whenever manual overrides disengaged flight channels. Today, the audio from Flight 593 is still played in pilot safety and crew resource management courses. The autopilot followed the exact physical inputs it received, surrendering partial control to a human. The disaster was simply that the adults responsible for the aircraft did not realize a child's curious hands had taken it until the ground was rushing up to meet them.